The ration brick came in a gray wrapper, with the compact seal stamped on one corner, and Kale's youngest had already learned to peel that corner back first, as if the seal were the gift and the food were secondary. He watched her do it from the kitchen doorway. 7 years old, small for her age, because all the kids in the protectorate districts were small for their age, and she laid the corner of wrapper on the table with the same careful reverence you'd give a napkin at a good restaurant. Then she broke the brick down the center seam and gave half to her brother without being asked. A quarter of a brick. That was breakfast on a normal morning. Keiko turned back to the counter and finished making the tea, which wasn't tea but a hot grain infusion that the distribution lists called tea, and he didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that his children didn't already know. The cease outside the kitchen window was called Meridian Station, which had been called Portland before the compact absorbed it in 2094. The buildings were the same. The streets were the same, more or less. What was different was harder to name. It lived in small things. The way the transit announcements had a 3-beat pause before they began, because they were translated from Veth administrative language, and the syntax didn't quite map. The way the allocation offices were always slightly too cold. The way the propaganda posters, and there were many propaganda posters, tasteful ones, in muted civic tones, showed humans smiling in ways that looked almost right but weren't, like someone had studied smiling from a description of it. Kale was an artist. He noticed these things occupationally. He was also 2 weeks behind on the housing contribution fee, which the compact called a fee and which functioned as rent. And his daughter had worn through the sole of her left shoe, and the commission from the Meridian Cultural Exchange, that had kept them fed since January, had quietly evaporated when the exchange's Veth liaison decided that Kale's last mural was insufficiently collaborative in its thematic register. He still didn't know exactly what that meant. He suspected it meant the mural had looked too much like a human made it. So when the message came through the district terminal, with the compact's triple seal header, he read it 3 times before he let himself understand what it was. The Bureau of Social Continuity was commissioning a public art campaign. The campaign was called Graduation. It was aimed at citizens approaching what the Bureau termed their contribution threshold, the productivity metric, recalibrated annually, below which a citizen was eligible for reassignment to Relocation Sector 7. The campaign needed warmth. It needed human warmth, specifically. The Bureau had run 17 previous campaigns through its own design division and had found them, internally, to be suboptimal in their emotional resonance. They were looking for an outside contractor. Someone with demonstrated cultural fluency. Someone who could make this feel like a gift. The fee was more money than Kale had seen in 8 months. He sat with the message for a long time. The grain infusion went cold. From the other room, he could hear his daughter explaining something to her brother and the patient, slightly condescending tone she used when she was teaching him a game, and the sound of it. Ordinary, unremarkable, the texture of a morning that was still intact, was the thing that made him open the reply form. He told himself it was just design work. He told himself the Bureau would find someone else if he said no. He told himself a lot of things that morning, and they were all technically true, and none of them were the real reason. The real reason was half a ration brick on a table. The Bureau's project contact was a Veth administrator named Sivithrun, though the human staff at the district office called it Sivaver, because the full name required a palate click that human mouths weren't shaped for. It was tall in the way all Veth were tall, with the elongated neck segment and the 4 secondary eyes that stayed half-lidded during meetings, unless something surprised them. Its primary eyes were amber, which meant mid-rank. The higher the rank, the deeper the amber went, until the senior consul's eyes were the color of old honey, nearly opaque. Seaver's eyes were the color of a traffic signal, and it looked at Kale across a desk that was too large for the room, and it said, in the flat, over-enunciated English that Veth administrators used when they wanted to project authority, "We require resonance." The previous campaigns were technically correct. They failed at the level of feeling. "What kind of feeling are you looking for?" Kale asked. Seaver's secondary eyes opened slightly. Comfort. Dignity, the sense of completion. Citizens at threshold often experience anxiety. This is counterproductive. The campaign should communicate that graduation is earned, that it is something looked forward to. Kale had his notebook open on his knee. He was drawing small shapes while he listened, a habit, and he made himself stop. "Do you have examples of the previous campaigns, so I know what direction not to go?" Seaver slid a flat panel across the desk. Kale looked at the images. They were exactly what he'd expected. Clean lines, institutional colors, the compact seal prominently displayed, humans depicted in profile with the kind of neutral expression that suggested contentment without risking any feature that might read as too specific, too individual. The faces were amalgamations. They were the human faces that resulted from a committee vote. "I see what you mean," Kale said. "Can you do better?" He looked at the images a moment longer. Then he closed the panel. Yes, he took the contract. He rode the transit home through a city that had been his city's once and was now something else, that wore his city's face. And he didn't look at the other passengers, and he didn't look at the posters on the transit walls. And when he got home, his daughter was asleep on the couch, with her school reader open on her chest, and her left shoe was sitting by the door with the sole starting to separate. And Kale went to his drawing table and opened his sketchbook, and stared at a blank page for a very long time. He drew an old man's face. He didn't know why he crossed it out. The work went quickly at first, the way terrible things often do. He had genuine skill, and the campaign gave him something to push against, and the technical problem was interesting. How do you make people feel that losing their place in the world is actually arriving somewhere? He approached it the way he'd been trained, from the image outward, and he found that if he didn't think about what the images meant, and only thought about what they did, the way the eye tracked, the emotionals register, the balance of warm color against negative space, he could work for several hours before the full weight of it settled back down on him. He made studies, an open sky above a mountain ridgeline, a hand, human, older, resting open on a surface that implied stillness, a figure walking toward a light source, the posture relaxed, the shoulders unburdened. He was good at suggesting things without committing to them, and what these images suggested was peace, rest, the end of effort. He drew them with genuine craft, and he was aware, in the same compartment of his mind, where he kept things he couldn't yet look at directly, that the craft was part of what made them dangerous. It was the fourth day when he went to the Threshold Processing Center. He told himself it was research, visual reference. He wanted to see the real space, so his imagery would feel grounded in something actual. This was a reasonable professional justification, and it was probably also true. The center was in the east sector of Meridian Station, in a building that had been a civic center before, and still looked like one from the outside. Concrete, broad steps, the remnants of a public art installation along the east wall that nobody had bothered to remove. Inside, the entry hall had been refitted with compact administrative fixtures. There was a processing queue along one wall. There was a waiting area. Kale checked in at the visitor's desk, showed his bureau contractor credentials, and was given a courtesy pass and directed to the public observation area on the second floor, where a long window looked down on the main intake hall. He stood there for a while and watched. There were maybe 40 people below. Most of them were old in the way that people who've worked hard get old, a heaviness that wasn't just age. Some were accompanied by family, most weren't. A Veth administrative aide moved through the queue, unhurried, with a handheld scanner, and the humans stepped aside or stepped forward as directed. With the particular docility of people who have been trained by many smaller interactions to understand that compliance is faster. Kale watched, and he drew in his notebook, and he kept his face neutral. Then the old man looked up. He was somewhere in the middle of the queue, slight, wearing a jacket that had once been good, and he turned his head and looked up at the observation window, the way you look at something you've been aware of for a while, without acknowledging it. He looked directly at Kale, not a glance, a full look, sustained, clear-eyed. His expression wasn't afraid. It wasn't resigned either, which was somehow worse than afraid would have been. It was the expression of a man who had understood something completely and had decided to be lucid about it. He held Kale's gaze for perhaps 4 seconds. Then the queue moved, and he turned away. Kale stood at the window for another 10 minutes, without drawing anything. Then he went home. He finished the campaign assets in 6 days. They were the best work of his professional life, technically. The color work was extraordinary. The emotional register was, as Seaver had requested, warm and dignified, and full of the sense of completion. He had put real craft into them, which was the thing he couldn't stop thinking about, and he submitted the files through the bureau portal and received an automated confirmation, and then a personal message from Seaver expressing what the translator rendered as structural satisfaction. The housing fee was paid. His daughter got new shoes. Kale sat in his kitchen in the middle of the night and drank the grain infusion that was called tea, and tried to locate the exact moment when he had made the decision he was now living with. But the moment wasn't findable, because it hadn't been a single decision. It had been a series of small ones, each one reasonable on its own, each one logically connected to the one before it. This was how these things worked. He understood that now, in a way that was uncomfortable to understand. He thought about the old man's face, the jacket that had once been good, the clear, lucid eyes, the 4 seconds. He opened his sketchbook and turned to the page where he'd drawn the old man's face on the first day and crossed it out. He looked at the crossing out for a while. Then he drew the face again, more carefully this time, on the next page. He got it right on the second try. He sat looking at it. He thought about what a face could do. He thought about the difference between an image that comforted and an image that told the truth, and whether those could be the same image, and decided that they could. He thought about the 17 previous campaigns and their technically correct faces that felt like nothing. He thought about what it would mean to be genuinely good at this. Then he opened the campaign files back up. The graduation campaign launched on a Tuesday, and by Thursday the district posting boards had the images up, and the Bureau's internal metrics were registering what Seaver later called unprecedented effective response. Cale knew what this meant. He had made something that landed. What the Bureau did not immediately understand was what it had landed. The images went up across Meridian Station, and then across the northern districts, and then, because the campaign was a pilot for a broader rollout, across 6 other protectorate zones in what had been the Pacific Northwest. The posters were everywhere. Transit hubs, allocation offices, the walls of processing centers. The Compact's Communication Bureau shared them on the district networks, and people stopped in front of them. Not the brief, registering pause of someone acknowledging a civic message. People stopped. They looked for a long time. Some of them had the expression of someone who has just been told something difficult in extremely gentle terms and is still deciding how to receive it. Cale knew why, because he had made them that way. The images were technically exactly what Seaver had commissioned. Warm, dignified, a sense of completion. But in the old man's face, and there was an old man's face in the campaign, in the third image of the series, the one meant to represent the dignity of age, Cale had drawn the 4 seconds. He had drawn the clear eyes and the full look of someone who has understood something completely. He had drawn the specific lucidity of a man who was not afraid but was not pretending either. The image showed a graduation. It showed a man walking toward a light source, the posture unburdened. But the face, that precise witnessed face, showed what was actually happening. Both things at once. The Compact's comfort and the human's knowledge. Cale had made an image that told the truth about itself in the same gesture it used to lie. It was the most technically demanding thing he had ever done. It required the viewer to know what they were looking at. And humans knew. Humans looked at it and felt the dissonance with the clarity of a tuning fork. Because humans were wired for exactly this. For the gap between a smile and the eyes above it. For the thing the face knows that the posture is concealing. 3 generations of Compact rule had not changed this. You could train people to compliance. You could not train the part of the human brain that read faces. The Veth looked at the same images and saw what they had asked for. This was the thing Cale had understood at his drawing table in the middle of the night. The Veth had needed a human artist because humans could produce emotional resonance that their own design division couldn't replicate. But the reason humans could produce it was the same reason they could weaponize it. You could not have one without the other. The first time Cale heard the words Bureau investigation, it came from a neighbor who had heard it from someone at the allocation office, who had a cousin in the administrative district. The Bureau had noted unusual behavioral patterns at postings sites, lingering, clustering. In 3 districts, small gatherings had formed in front of the third image in the series, the old man's face, and had stayed there for long enough that Veth administrative staff had logged it as an anomaly requiring review. Cale received no formal message. He waited. He kept his daughter's new shoes by the door. What happened instead, over the following 3 weeks, was quieter and more durable than any investigation. The image spread in ways that campaign images weren't supposed to spread. People photographed it on the posting boards and shared it through the district communication networks. Someone made a charcoal reproduction and left it in the window of a shuttered shop in the market district. Cale walked past it one morning and kept walking. Someone else made a version with a different background, not the soft, authoritative gradient of the Bureau design, but a black field, and the old man's face alone against it. and underneath it, a single word that wasn't part of any bureau copy, wasn't part of anything Cale had written, was just the word that people had apparently agreed on by themselves. Remember, the Bureau pulled the campaign images from the northern districts on a Thursday. By Friday, the street versions were replacing them. Seaver sent a message that the translator rendered as, "The project has encountered evaluation difficulties." Cale did not reply. He sat at his kitchen table and ate a ration brick, the whole brick, and he didn't peel the seal off the corner first, and he looked at the sketchbook lying open on the counter to the page with the old man's face. The face looked back at him with 4 seconds of full lucid attention. He thought about the old man in the queue, the jacket that had once been good, the deliberate turn of the head, as though he had been waiting for someone to look. He thought about what it means to be seen, actually seen, not processed or classified or assigned to a demographic or rendered into campaign-appropriate affect. Just seen, one face to another, across the distance of a compliance window. He hadn't given the old man anything. He hadn't saved him from the queue. He hadn't done any of the things that people were going to want to believe he'd done. In the version of this soul story that would get cleaner and more purposeful with each retelling. He had stood at a window and looked back. He had taken that look home and put it in his notebook, and then eventually put it in the work. The art had done the rest. This was the thing that the Compact and its 17 previous campaigns had not understood. You cannot commission human warmth and quarantine it from human truth, because warmth is not a separate register. It lives in the same instrument. The same capacity that makes a face read as genuinely comforted is the capacity that makes a face read as genuinely haunted. And when you hand a human artist a brief and pay them to find the real thing, you are also paying them to find everything the real thing is attached to. It was not strategy. It was not rebellion, not at first. It was Cale being good at his job in a way that extended further than the job's stated parameters. The campaign rollout was suspended across all protectorate zones pending review in the 6th week. The Bureau of Social Continuity issued a directive requiring all future public art commissions to pass through a new VETH-administered aesthetic review panel. Seaver was reassigned, which in compact terms was a form of censure. Cale's contractor credentials were placed under administrative hold, which meant he couldn't take Bureau commissions. He had expected this. He had approximately 6 weeks of savings, the new shoes, and a sketchbook with an old man's face in it that had somehow, without his entirely intending it, become one of the most widely reproduced images in 6 protectorate zones. He applied to the Eastern District Community Arts Fund, which was technically a compact institution, but was administered mostly by humans at the local level, and which funded projects defined as culturally expressive rather than communicatively functional. A distinction that the Compact found acceptable because it assumed that expression without function was inert. He was commissioned for a mural. He worked on it for 2 months, in the open on the eastern wall of the Civic Center that had once been a civic center and was now a processing center, and people watched him work, and sometimes they brought him things. Not much. A piece of something, a cup of the grain infusion that was called tea, and he accepted these things and worked and didn't say much, because there wasn't much to say that the wall wasn't going to say better. The mural was 30 meters long. It showed faces, 47 of them rendered in the style Cale had spent his adult life developing, precise, particular, each one witnessed rather than composed. Not heroic, not martyred, not the clean, legible effect of the Bureau's preferred human imagery. Just faces in the specific grain of their living, each one holding the thing it held. Each one belonging to someone who had made the long, complicated series of small decisions that a life is made of, and arrived, through those decisions, at an expression that was entirely their own. The old man's face was the 47th. It was the largest. It looked out from the wall of the processing center toward the street, with those 4 seconds of full, lucid attention, and every human who passed it knew immediately and without being told what they were looking at. And every Veth who passed it saw what the aesthetic review panel had approved. A culturally expressive image of a human elder, non-threatening, within acceptable parameters of dignity. On the 7th day after the funeral was finished, Cale was drinking tea that was not tea on the front step of his building when his daughter came and sat beside him. She leaned against his arm. "People keep stopping in front of your wall," she said. "I know. Is it like the poster?" He thought about it. A little bit like the poster. She was quiet for a moment. The city made its city sounds around them. Somewhere on the next street a group of kids were running. shouting something back and forth that was either an argument or a game, hard to tell from a distance. The old man on the wall, his daughter said. Who is he? Kale looked down at her. She was watching him, seeing with the ceaseless patient attention she'd had since she was small, the attention that waited for the real answer rather than the convenient one. I don't know his name, Kale said. I don't know anything about him except what I saw. What did you see? He thought about it. He thought about 4 seconds, a full look. A jacket that had once been good. The deliberate turn of a head in a processing queue, looking up at an observation window, as though he had been waiting to make sure someone saw him clearly before the queue moved again. Someone who wanted to be remembered, Kale said. His daughter nodded slowly, in the manner of someone confirming a thing they had already half understood. Then she reached into her pocket and produced a piece of chalk, white, somewhat used, and held it out to him. Some kids left this, she said. They said it was for you. He took the chalk. He turned it in his fingers. It was a child's piece of chalk, the kind you used on pavement, thick and slightly worn on one end. It weighed nearly nothing. He thought about everything that had started with half a ration on a table, and a contract from a bureau that needed human warmth, and didn't understand what it was asking for. Then he stood up, because the morning was there, and the city was there, and the wall was 30 meters long and had 47 faces on it, and there was space, if he looked at it right, for 48. He walked toward the wall, with the chalk in his hand, and his daughter's footsteps behind him. And in the way of small things that begin something larger without the moment being marked or recognized, the morning opened in front of him like a blank page.